and I hope you can see this now. From my perspective, it is now loading. So apologies for the technical glitch in the beginning, but we can start now. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. My name is Katarzyna Gaczyzająca. I'm a customer consultant for Elsevier, and I operate in Central Eastern Europe, and I will be doing the presentation for you today. To begin with, this webinar, well, the webinar is about good practices in scholarly publishing. It is a complementary webinar to the webinar I gave approximately 2 weeks ago on how to write a good article. So today I will cover other aspects of publishing than the actual preparation of the manuscript. Before we begin, there are a couple of, let's say, housekeeping rules so that everyone can get the best experience from this webinar. First of all, we suggest viewing the presentation in full screen. There is a small button in your bottom right corner. You can simply expand the view to the full screen view, and then you will see everything more precisely. Second of all, this session is being recorded, so you will be able to watch the recording afterwards using the same link that you used to register. It will be available to anyone, so if you have friends or colleagues who are not attending today, you can simply share the link with them. They will be able to view this on demand. And if you need to leave earlier today, that's still okay. You can come back and watch the recording at your convenience when you will have the time. And the third, the third information is if you have a question at any point of the presentation, there is box that you can use. It's called Ask Question. You can simply type in the question. I will see the questions as you type them. And during the intervals between each slide, I will pause, look at the questions. I'll answer to the ones which are relevant at this point of the presentation. I will also try to set aside some time at the very end so that we will have extra time to have the Q&A session in the end. So if there's a more general question, I could leave that for later. So I'll answer the relevant as I go, but the more general ones I'll leave at the end of the session if we have time. In the session today, I planned it for approximately 75 minutes, but I hope to be, let's say, finished with the slides themselves in approximately 65 minutes, so that we will have approximately 10 minutes for questions and answers if you should have them. I'm sorry to begin with, I apologize for my voice. I'm not feeling my best, so I hope I won't lose my voice in the middle of the training, so fingers crossed for that, and I'm sorry if I'll need to make a few pauses to have a drink of water. All right, so the agenda for today, let's begin. The overall agenda is I will give you an overview of scholarly publishing, what it is, how it started, why is this significant, why do we do this. Then I'll go over the smart journal choice, so what to look for when you are choosing a journal in which you want to publish. Then submission and peer review, how that process looks like, how to go through with it, and how to gain visibility and recognition for your paper. I will say a few words about open access because this is a rising subject all over Eastern Europe. It's a very hot subject these days. And then I'll jump into my favorite part, which is the ethical concerns. So a few words, very few words about ethics from the perspective of the author. And in the end, the Q&A session. All right. So first of all, when it began, this is an actual quote by the gentleman you can see on the right-hand side, Mr. Henry Oldenburg, the founder of the first truly scientific scholar journal. In this quite long quote, this is actually practically only one sentence, which is amazingly long. You can see that he basically says that science needs to be clearly and truly communicated so that solid science and useful knowledge is shared with other people, and therefore researchers should feel invited to search, try and find out new things, and then impart their knowledge. And this is basically the most important part, that we should pursue scholarly publishing, we should pursue academic publishing for purposes of developing and moving science forward and to perfect our state-of-the-art knowledge. So this is just a quote I like to open the session with, but let's have a quick view on the origins of scholarly publishing. I'm not an expert on history. I like to read about history, but it was never my forte in school. Nevertheless, how it all began? It all began basically with Gutenberg's discovery, Gutenberg's invention of a movable type, which allowed books to be produced quicker and in larger volumes. It still doesn't mean that books were popular. Mostly before Gutenberg's, or still around Gutenberg's invention, most of the books were either way of religious nature, or they were knight romances. And not many people could read, not many people could write, so they were a rather expensive commodity, and they were quite rarely met and rarely used. Nevertheless, when Gutenberg created his invention, books became increasingly popular and increasingly common. Still very expensive, still difficult to get, and still majority of the community of society could not read or write, but that made a move forward. And in 1580, the first House of Elsevier was founded, and House of Elsevier was founded by Elsevier brothers, and it was it was of course Netherlands, and from the beginning it was designed to be more of a scientific or a scholarly publisher rather than regular publisher. Nevertheless, House of Elsevier published many books, including those by Galileo, which are an amazing legacy to the current company. Nevertheless, this company was not successful. They actually stopped operating. I can't remember in which year, and the current company, Elsevier, was founded on the basics of that company. So we took the name and we took legacy and all the historic, everything that was historically published by Elsevier, and the current company started in 1880. But let's step away from the current company. Let's go back to the scholarly publishing origins. Henry Oldenburg, whom I mentioned in the slide before, he founded the first scientific journal. The scientific journal was entitled Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. It was founded in 1665, so ages ago, more than 350 years ago. And there is a nice story around how that one was published. Henry Oldenburg was a member of the Royal Society, and rumor has it, or let's say the story of the journal has it, that Henry decided at one point that the discussions of the Royal Society should be made available to other people as well, because they would simply benefit from those discussions, from those meetings. Nevertheless, not everyone could attend the meeting, not everyone was a member of the society. And of course, in the 17th century, traveling was not as easy as now, so not everyone was able to attend meetings or discussions within the Royal Society. And he decided that he would like to take notes, take minutes of those meetings, either way for their own future reference or even to share externally. And that was accepted by the society. However, some of the members raised the concern that if this actually needs to go externally, they would like to verify what is written in the journal before it is published. And that's how peer review was born. So the content of the journal was already reviewed by the members of the Royal Society. And then the journal became published. The first issue came out on March 6, 1665. And that's how it all began. And that is considered to be the first truly scholarly journal, because it contains, or it had all the four elements of scholarly communication. And the four elements, or the four roles that each good scholarly communication should entail is registration. That's a primary role. So by scholarly publishing, we timestamp, we officially note who submitted scientific results first. So who was the first one to discover something, who was the first one to formulate a hypothesis, who was the first one to test it. Second of all, there's certification. Certification in this context means simply verification of validity and integrity of the submitted work. So certification is done by peer review, so by other researchers verifying and checking whether the published work or the proposed work is scientifically sound and valid. And then we have dissemination, and this is the responsibility of publishers. And this is what we do for everyone who publishes with us, and other publishers do it as well. We provide a vast medium through which you can communicate your work. So you entrust us with your work that we will announce it globally to the community. If you publish with Elsevier, then your work is available on Science Direct, and from what I remember, we have more than 12 million users of Science Direct from all over the world. And this is basically the largest platform by a single publisher. So it is an extremely vast medium through which we ensure visibility of our work. And then preservation. This is something that publishers also need to do. We need to preserve your work for posterity. So for our children, grandchildren, and future generations, so that they will not have to redo the science we've done already. This is something that publishers are obliged to do. And there's something I always like to ask during live trainings is, if you publish with Elsevier, for how long does it exist? And the good answer is forever. We invest in permanent archiving. We entrust external companies with archiving of everything that we've published, which basically means even if, and I'll have to knock on the wood, the company does not exist anymore, sorry, I'm superstitious, then everything that we've published will still be available for everyone to read. So your work will always be accessible. And I'm talking about these 4 roles of scholarly publishing for another reason. You probably have heard, or if not, then you will hear in a few minutes, about predatory publishers. Predatory publishers do not fulfill these roles. They do not provide you preservation, they do not provide you dissemination, definitely not certification, and the registration is also very doubtful or quite iffy, I would even say. But I'll go back to that in a few minutes later. So let's start with choosing the journal. I'll quickly have a look if you have any questions. Just give me 3 seconds. Okay, I don't see any questions so far. Okay, good. So smart journal choice. Let's begin maybe with a simple question. Why does it matter where you publish? Why does journal choice matter? You don't have to answer that to me, but think about it a little bit. The last time you published, why did you choose the journal in which you published? What was your motivation for that? And I know people may have a variety of deciding factors. I was a researcher myself. I worked in academia for almost 10 years, and I had my reasons behind choosing the journal. Nevertheless, why does journal choice matter, really? What should be your key motivation? There is basically one good answer. The holy grail of choosing the right journal. Your holy grail is the right journal. And the right journal is the one that allows you to reach the intended audience for your work. And there is also a question, what do you mean by intended audience? Intended audience to me are people who will understand, appreciate, and take my work further. Sorry for technical glitch again. So I want to reach people who will understand it, appreciate it, and take it further. Anyone else to me is an irrelevant reader, because those people will not clearly benefit from my work. They may enjoy it, they may like it, but they will not advanced science basing on that. I appreciate if someone wants to read my paper without using it for further work, but I would ideally want everyone to feel inspired to do research the way I did it, or to build on what I've done. And how do you choose the journal? So you have to think of who reads the journal in which I want to publish. I know who are the readers I want to reach, but what do they really read? And there are a few tips and tricks on how to do it. First of all, I always advise to have a short list of candidate journals. And there are a few ways to do it. I'm sorry. First of all, check your reference list. If you're citing work the way it is supposed to be, and I believe all of you do that, therefore you only cite work which is relevant, you only cite the work which inspired you to do your own work. And if this is the case, and it should be the case, then you can simply check the reference list. Because if you were citing the journal, if you were reading it and citing it, it basically means that it published research relevant to yours. And if it published research relevant to yours, therefore it may be read by relevant audience as well. So researchers like yourself are probably reading the journal as well. Secondly, always, especially if you're a junior researcher, you can always ask your supervisor, ask your colleagues to provide suggestions, ask them for feedback about specific titles, but always remember that especially if this is, let's say, personal experience, so if someone told you that the peer review process was not nice, it may still simply be a personal experience and may not be a valid reason to reject the journal. I would always add here as well, ask a librarian. If you're unsure about the quality of the journal, you can always ask the librarian, especially those who engage in bibliometrics and those who work in scientific information departments. Those librarians are usually experts in advising on journals. And of course, certain databases, but certain databases with strict quality control. It is very important that when you are using a bibliographic database, so a database that collects information about what was published, that you are using a database where there is quality control. So when there is an expert or a board of experts who basically checked whether the journal is the right journal, whether it is scientifically and ethically sound. One of those databases is Scopus. Scopus is the largest abstract and citation database in the world, with more than 75 million records currently, and if I remember, more than 25,000 active journals. So you have quite a lot of journals to choose from. And then when you have a list of, let's say, 5 journals or 8 journals, start investigating them one by one. I always put it in the table, and I grade them on a scale of 1 to 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And I always check these elements. So first of all, aims and scope. Does my paper really meet aims and scope? Because if not, then I'm risking a very quick desk rejection by the editor, because they are very unwilling to publish anything outside aims and scope, because that's how they lose reputation very quickly. Second of all, I verify if my type of work is accepted by the journal. So if I published a short communication, I need to check whether the journal publishes short communications or not. Some journals do not do that. Some journals will only publish, let's say, full text articles. And the same with review articles. If I want to publish a review article, if I've written one and I've worked on one and I want to publish it, I need to find a journal which will accept it. Many journals, especially those with higher quality, they will not accept ad hoc submissions of review articles, but they will invite authors to publish. They will carefully select experts in the field and invite them to write a review article. But this is the criteria usually used by the top journals. But then check the peer review process, and in this case I can only say never ever choose a journal without peer review process. Don't go there simply, because as much as your paper may be excellent, and would go through peer review easily, then you don't know really what's the quality of the papers published in the same issue even as your paper. So as a result, you may have unfortunate situation when a few other articles in the issue were of extremely low quality but were published anyways because there was no peer review process. And in a way, this may be remembered by your colleagues that you published in that, let's say, doubtful journal. Check the readership, check the publisher. In terms of checking readership, simply ask your colleagues who work in the field whether they heard of the journal. See who is citing the journal, whether you recognize the names of the people, whether these are experts in your field, the leaders in your field or not. See whether you've read it a lot or is this the first time you've heard of the title. And check the publisher. In terms of publishers, simply check what does the publisher do for you. So how your paper will be distributed, how many, so simply assess the size and the quality of the publisher, and especially if you have suspicion that this is a predatory publisher, make sure you definitely check each and every aspect so that you don't fall victim to that predatory publisher, because unfortunately that happens. And then ethics statement, I always advise that. Have a look on the journal website whether they have a very comprehensive publishing ethics malpractice statement. It is a statement that protects you as an author from any sort of ethical misconduct from the editors, from the reviewers. It's basically a protection paper for you. And then speed of publication. To some authors, this is very relevant. To others, it is not. When I was publishing my last papers, I didn't really care how long it will take. I think it took more than half a year at that point, and this is chemistry. But you can always check what's the speed of publication, but please be realistic. Don't trust a journal which promises you publication and a review within a week, because it's simply not realistic. I'll give you an example in chemistry. So in my field, the average response time that I've encountered, so the first response from the editor usually came within 1 week. So within a few days from submission, we have an answer from the editor, yes, we will review that, or no, it's out of range and scope, we will not do that. Then the reviewers are given some time to think whether they want to review or not, approximately 1 week for the decision, and then approximately 4 weeks to do the review, to send it back to the editor, and then the editor takes time as well. So it's difficult to make this happen in 1 week. But if you are interested in what's the speed of publication, we publish this information on all of our journals, so you can have an estimate how fast you can publish with us in a specific journal, because this of course depends on the discipline. And the final thing is I compared whether the journal publishes in subscription or whether it publishes in open access. To some authors, open access will be very important, to others not necessarily. So you have to make the decision which publishing model you choose. All right, so you should always use bibliometrics. So bibliometric parameters, these are numbers which give you an idea, an approximation on the likelihood of being cited if you publish in a given journal. It is very often translated into prestige or the quality of the journal, but I would say it is only one of many indicators whether the journal is of high quality or not. And if you use those metrics correctly, they can really contribute to, they can really help you make a very good decision. But if you misuse them, you can unfortunately quickly jump to bad conclusions, sorry, incorrect conclusions. So 2 golden rules I recommend. First of all, always use quantitative and qualitative input into your decision. So always check the numbers, but also focus on things, check the things that are impossible to be expressed by numbers. So reputation of the editor-in-chief, reputation of his deputies, let's say reputation of the journal or the publisher all over. These are things you cannot really express in hard numbers exclusively. So take that into account. And the second one is always use more than one quantitative metric. Always use more than one number. So don't fixate on a single bibliometric and don't use that as the as the only standard, because there are tens of different bibliometric parameters you can choose, and each of them will show you a slightly different aspect of how the journal is popular and how the journal is operating. And it is impossible to simply take one of those numbers and trust it fully. So always use more than one, and also, if you can, use for more than just 1 year. If I told you that the journal has site score 5 this year, that's okay. But again, is this good in the discipline or not? Is this a normalized metric or not? And even if we assume that site score 5 is good, then I would still push you to the question, what was the metric 5 years ago, 3 years ago? Whether that is declining or whether that is increasing. You simply have to look at the trend of the metric and not at the metric itself, not at a given value for a given year. Because your journal choice is like a long-term bank investment. And when you are using metrics, I mentioned use more than one. We have plenty to choose from. The ones that you see in solid circles are present in Scopus. You can use them if you go to scopus.com. And there is on the blue ribbon, there is a tool to compare sources. It's called Compare Source, and you see this on the blue ribbon. You can simply click on that, and that is a tool to compare journals through these metrics over the period of time. There is a metric called CiteScore, SJR, and SNP. These three are all citation-based. CiteScore is similar to CiteScore basically is similar to impact factor with two major changes. First of all, it shows you a 3 years citation period, not 2 years. And second of all, in the denominator, it includes all types of documents, so everything that is being published by the journal and not only so-called citable items. Then we have SJR, Imago Journal Rank, a metric which is said to be the metric of prestige of the journal. It's quite complex to explain how it works, and it's not a focus today, so I'll not go into that. In SNP, which is the source normalized impact per paper, developed by a research group at University of Leiden. And SNP is the only normalized metric that allows you to compare journals between disciplines. Then we have share of articles, which are review articles, because they contribute to the total volume of citations and therefore may influence all citation-based metrics. Share of articles not cited, to show you exactly what's the likelihood of being not cited. Number of papers, which give you the idea of the size of the journal, so the size of your readership. Citation count, that's self-explanatory, and we also have Plumex metrics to individual papers, showing the recognition of a given paper outside classical academia, so English-speaking media, blogs, social media, things like that. And of course, there is impact factor, which you cannot find in Scopus because it is owned by Clarivate Analytics, which is the current owner of Web of Science. And that one you can, of course, check in Web of Science. And I'll be honest, as a researcher, I was also using it to have a fuller picture, to have a better understanding. And if you are used to using impact factor and never used CiteScore, the good news is that these two correlate quite well. So if you are used to the fact that impact factor 5 is good in your field, then you can easily switch to CiteScore, because CiteScore 5 will also be good in your field. All right. And speaking of tools, we can of course use tools to help ourselves in choosing the journal. And as I said, first of all, choose scientific database. So databases with quality control. I could speak for 2 hours about what is the process of quality control in journals accepted into Scopus, but to give you a very quick idea, there is an external board of experts which makes the decision whether the journal can be included or cannot be included. We have a transparent list of who are these experts, and we have a transparent list of criteria, selection criteria regarding journals. So you understand that when you find a journal in Scopus, you can trust that it was checked by external experts, not by the company Elsevier that owns Scopus, but by researchers, expert researchers. There is also a tool called Journal Finder. You can find it at journalfinder.elsevier.com, or you can simply Google it, Elsevier Journal Finder, and you will find it. This is a tool we developed to help authors to find the right journal to publish in. So basically how it works, we have a computer that is reading every single paper we published, and it is then learning what is the language of the paper typically published in a given journal. So it basically learns what is the language used in a given journal, and then it looks for keywords, for nouns, for typical phrases, and of course for keywords, so for nouns which are associated with the scope of the journal. And then you simply type in your title, you type in your abstract, and you click Find, and it will look up all journals which match to your abstract and to your title. It really works nicely. It gives you a suggestion of, I can't remember, I think approximately 10 journals sorted by probability that you fit, that your abstract would fit to this journal. It gives you an overview also on how long it takes to publish, what is the rejection or the acceptance rate, so how many papers we accept in percentage, how long the peer review process takes, how long the publication, so the production process takes, and whether there is an open access option or whether the journal is exclusively open access, and if it is, then what would be the fee. And then how to check if the journal acts ethically. So I mentioned this already, that the journal should have a clear publishing ethics malpractice statement in place, and this should be respected by the journal. And it basically is a statement that describes rights and responsibilities of authors, reviewers, and editors, also usually the publisher, and consequences if misconduct is reported or detected. So if someone does something naughty, what can happen to them in a nutshell, and who makes sure that the consequences are being drawn. This is very important to have for many reasons. First of all, it's the best protection for you as an author against any misconduct from the reviewers or from the editors. It's also important for reviewers, it's also important for editors. It simply protects everyone's rights as well as sets the scope of responsibilities. In Scopus as a database, we do require the journal to have publishing ethics malpractice statement because it also is a document that allows to take action against any let's say unethical editor or unethical journal. We require that to be present. It also protects you against predatory journals. Predatory journals is one of my favorite subjects, I think, in terms of ethics in publishing. And there is, let's say, something quite unfortunate, that nobody is immune to predatory publishing. As much as we thought before, like earlier, a few years back, many people believed that predatory publishing is simply the biggest problem in emerging countries. So Eastern Europe, maybe even more further to the east, or Asia. We expected the more mature research communities not to fall victim to predatory publishers. Unfortunately, this is not the case. This is a screenshot from an article from a year ago. It basically says that at least 5,000 German researchers published work in at least one predatory journal. It is actually quite scary to think, because we wouldn't really expect a mature community to be that easily tricked into publishing in predatory journals. So what are predatory journals? Because this is something very important to know. Predatory publishers and predatory journals, they basically exploit the necessity to communicate science. They exploit and distort the idea of open access, and they also, let's say, address the problem of lengthy publication process. So these are journals which basically saw an opportunity in making money very quickly and very easily by tricking researchers into thinking that their work will be published in a very good journal, but without all the pain that is associated typically with publishing in a very high quality journal. So the things that researchers usually meet in their life is that, first of all, I need to publish because I need to communicate science, or I need to publish, I need to advance my career. So there's the necessity of communication. So I need to publish. And then the predatory journal comes and says, okay, you want to publish, but what do you not like? Well, I don't like getting bad reviews. I don't like paying much for open access. And I don't like that I have to wait for a very long time to be published. And they say, okay, deal, we'll do it very quickly and painlessly for you. So the typical warning signs are fast publication, 1 or 2 weeks, which is absolutely impossible to make. They usually say that this is already, of course, with a peer review, which is, again, impossible. 1 week is usually the editorial time, so the time for editor to answer. Then they have time to invite the reviewers, and the reviewers have another week or so to decide whether they want to publish, whether they want to review the paper. So it's not possible to do it in 1 or 2 weeks. Then we have predicted or local bibliometric parameters. So if you see a bibliometric parameter you've never heard of, Google it. It might simply be even a fake bibliometric parameter. I saw Indian impact factor or predicted impact factor or predicted site score. Those things cannot happen. You can only have impact factor or site score if you already are indexed in the database. Those things that you have a predicted metric doesn't really matter. It's simply unfair towards the potential author. Then poor language, especially if the English language is very poor, those invitation emails, they're off-putting just by the quality of the language, typically. The website can look suspicious, especially if you're asked already for your credit card details. Then that's very suspicious. Relatively low charges, and typically without any explanation why these charges are implemented. So let's say they will simply say publication is 300 euros. But why would I pay to publish? I can only pay to publish if this is open access. If this is not open access, I should never pay for that, because this basic, well, I should not pay for that. And you have to find out what are the charges, when they are being charged, and what for. And be very, very careful, especially when you are asked for your credit card details, because there were instances when the journals were simply set up to steal credit card details and nothing else. So you may find yourself in a situation that instead of simply paying that 300 or 200 euro for publication in a predatory journal, someone is now using your credit card to book holidays in Thailand. That could also happen. And the last part is very scarce information about the publisher. No information about editorial board or the publication process. Or if you look up the address, the postal address of the publisher, you may be surprised where they are located. I once found a publisher, this was a quite well-known situation, it was a predatory publisher. They had their office at, how do you call this, a traffic shop, so a shop where you can buy cigarettes and newspapers. This was their postal address. So quite not probable to be a good publisher. And there used to be a list called the Beals list, a list of predatory journals, but I'm against any fixed list when it comes to predatory publishers, because this is an extremely dynamic issue, so it changes every day. That list would be outdated in a matter of days. That's why I believe in education. So you can educate yourself, go to Think, Check, Submit. It's an initiative done by the community to fight predatory journals by means of educating the community. There is basically a checklist that tells you what to look for, what you should ask yourself when you are choosing the journal. What are the typical warning signs? It's simply a list of things you need to answer yourself when you verify the journal. It is translated into local languages by volunteers. So I'm not sure if there's one in your local language, but you may volunteer to translate it. It's a one page, takes you half an hour to do, and then the rest of the community can benefit from this as well. And how to spot a predator. That is the checklist, but I will not go through it right now because I covered most of this already. Just what I would say is always check the journal if it really is also in professional databases, because we've seen quite on the rise predatory journals which claim to be indexed in professional databases like Scopus, like Web of Science, but they are really not in there. So if a journal claims they are, check if they really are indexed, because they might not be. All right, I'll have a quick look whether you had any questions. All right, no questions, then we will proceed to submission and peer review. I need to pick up my pace a little bit because we have not that much time left, and I know Bright Talk will cut me off if I speak too long. Okay, so submission and peer review. You have your manuscript prepared, you have it ready, you chose the journal, now what? Now you want to submit it. And in terms of submissions, there are a few ground rules. Ground rule number one, always choose one journal at a time. So when you had that list, you chose, let's say, 3 journals which you love the most, send it to only one journal, not to all 3 at the same time. Many publishers simply use anti-plagiarism systems. They make quickly, they use anti-plagiarism systems, and in the age of digital publishing, publishing happens very fast. So what may happen is that your paper will be accepted in 2 journals at the same time, and you will not have the time to withdraw the paper from one of the journals, and as a result it will be spotted as plagiarism. That's one of very many reasons why not more than one journal. And the other one is simply unethical to bother 2 journals with their reviewers to actually review your paper. All authors must approve the manuscript journal choice, so all authors need to accept that this is the final version of the paper, and that they accept the journal which you chose. You need to adhere to author guidelines, so there usually is a description of what is expected of you, how you should construct your paper, what scope should it have, and so on. You should really adhere to those. Those will also have the submission instruction. Always submit the paper according to the instructions given by the journal. And this is very important. So if there is a submission system, use the submission system. Don't send it by email to just anyone. Provide a cover letter for your manuscript. I covered the cover letter in the last training, in the last webinar, so you can go back to that recording and have a look. And remember that editorial times and peer review duration vary from journal to journal, and especially among disciplines. Some disciplines like medicine or chemistry or physics will be a little bit quicker in publishing and peer review than, for example, arts, humanities, or social sciences. There are many reasons for that, but please remember this will vary. And if you are in any doubt, if anything during the submission process or after submission, if anything raises your concern, reach out to your handling editor, so the editor that is assigned to your paper. The purpose of peer review. First of all, it helps to determine the quality, validity, and significance, and also originality of the work. And this is carried out by other researchers. We as publishers, we facilitate the process, we facilitate peer review, but we do not deliver it, we don't do it. We cannot really intervene with it because this is the academic process, and we as publishers, we are outside, so we cannot in any way influence the final outcome of the peer review. But we do provide appropriate tools and appropriate systems for either way the editors or the reviewers to use, so that from the technical aspect their work is facilitated. Types of peer review. You may be surprised, but there are quite many. First of all, we have the single blind, which is very popular. In this situation, the reviewer sees the author's name and therefore is obliged to report any conflict of interest to the editor. Then we have double blind. Nobody sees any names. In this case, you should flag it to the editor if you think you recognized who was the author. You should flag if you have a concern that there might be a conflict of interest. But then there is the open peer review. We've actually been having some trials in some of our journals with open peer review, and I really like the way it looks. So in this case, usually the reviewer's name is disclosed to the author, and the author's name is disclosed to the reviewer, so they both can flag conflict of interest, but then we can go deeper and further. So the reviewer name can be published, and the reviewer's report can be published with their name or without their name. There are many variants here, all have their weaknesses and their advantages, but just remember there's more than one option. But when you are deciding to be the reviewer or not, please consider which one, whether the type of the review system, the model of review in the given journal, whether that suits you or not. Because not everyone wants to do the open review and not everyone wants to do the double-blind review. And right, maybe this is not how it looks like, although being an author myself, it sometimes felt like this. This is not how peer review looks like. It looks more like this. This is what actually happens in the reviewing process. So we started the Blue Dot as an author. You submit a paper, it goes to the editor, which is here. The editor checks whether the basic requirements are met, and if they are not, the paper is rejected. And this type of rejection is called the desk rejection. The higher the quality of the journal, the more desk rejections happen for a simple reason. They simply have more applications, more submissions, because people are more willing to publish there. If the basic requirements are met, then the editor assigns reviewers according to their best practice. They invite the reviewers. The reviewers review the papers, submit back to the editor their recommendations. The editor then analyzes the recommendations and makes a final decision. And the decision can be either way: reject with justification why, or accept. And in terms of acceptance, there are two ways. Either way is the beautiful unicorn of academic publishing, which is accept as is, so accept without any changes, or accept after revisions. So if it's with revisions, then the paper goes back to the author revises it and sends it back to the editor. And then usually the editor makes the decision whether this should be reviewed once more or whether the changes are already sufficiently good enough. And the example of the reviewer checklist. So when you have your paper reviewed, what you will see is a written elaborate from the reviewer, so the whole report describing what should be fixed, what should be changed in your paper, or what is the good thing about your paper. But usually journals also have something like this. It's a checklist they give to the editor and ask to complete. And this helps the editor to make the final decision, because quite often the reviewers, and I've been reviewing many papers myself, and I could either way, I know I could find myself in a situation when I didn't want to sound too mean to the author, or I didn't want to sound too soft or too nice. So I was, basically my written report was very soft, and I felt stronger about the paper, but I could not disclose it or couldn't put it simply in the review. So there is the checklist, and you give a final score to the paper, the overall manuscript rating, and that helps the editor to make the decision whether the paper should be published or not. When you get the review, you have to respond to it. So keep calm. Even if the review seems very unfriendly, just keep calm and respond to the review. And calm is the key word here, because C stands for comprehend. So stay cool, take all your emotions aside, and make sure you understand all the comments that the reviewers had to your paper. So make sure you understand all of those questions they have. Second of all, answer them. And in terms of answering, so answer all the questions, but remember, you can always disagree with them. But you have to show proof why you disagree. So accept them, make amendments to the paper, or disagree. List all the comments and questions and list all your changes. So highlight them in a given color. Tell the reviewer, thank you for the comment. We've made change on page 5, paragraph 3, highlighted in green. This is the amendment we propose, so that the reviewer doesn't have to read your paper again, but can only refer to the sections which you have corrected. And simply be mindful, make it easy for the reviewers and the editors. The easier you make it for them to go through your paper again, the more, let's say, warm memories they will have of working with your paper. So list all the comments to make sure you address them and highlight all the changes you made to the paper. And now, gaining visibility and recognition. Just give me 1 second to have a look if you have any questions. No questions still. All right, so gaining visibility and recognition. Visibility matters a lot to researchers, not only to researchers, but visibility basically in a nutshell contributes to better advancement of your career. You can build your network quicker, you can basically become a recognized researcher that everyone knows of and respects. And this is basically what you would like to achieve in your career. So how to do this? We start by simply gaining visibility of your work. So make sure your research is visible. Step 1, promote it at conferences. But not only by going and being the speaker, because not everyone can be a speaker and not everyone can have a poster, but simply go there. Either way, with your last paper or with a leaflet, I've even seen researchers making small leaflets about what I recently published, and simply hand it out to people, speak to people about your work, openly ask them for feedback. That actually is a great way to start networking as well. Second of all, sign up and use ORCID. ORCID is free for everyone. It is associated with your name forever, so regardless of with which publisher you publish, you can use ORCID and that work will be linked to that account. Share your data, and this is quite important. If you share your data, you make it simply reproducible, you show more credibility to your work, and you also open up your data for further analysis. It simply gives more credibility and transparency to your work. You can consider publishing an open access model, and in response maybe to this point, open access does give you more readers and more downloads, but it is very unclear whether it really translates into more citations. Studies have shown that this depends on the discipline, but overall it doesn't have that much impact on the total citation count. But it will give you much more readers, and therefore maybe those people will reach out to you for different reasons rather than simply wanting to cite your work. Then track usage. So see how many citations you get. If you get many citations, see who cited you. Maybe reach out to those people, invite them for a short call in which you would discuss what they liked about your paper and showcase it. So if only you can put it even if you in your email footnote. This is my last paper. That's the link to my last paper. It was cited by 500 people so far, or in my case, 5 people. Have a look at it. Maybe you like it. Share it on social media. Share it using professional networks. Make sure that when you share it, you don't breach copyright. And we do have sharing guidelines if you are afraid what you can do with your paper at what point. You can find this information on our website. It's simply Elsevier sharing policy. If you type that into Google, you'll find it. We basically tell you what you can share with whom at which stage of publication. The good news is that maybe regardless of what is often said or mentioned by some researchers, we are very flexible with what you can share with papers published with us. So we do allow a lot of options of sharing absolutely for free with other colleagues. So have a look at it yourself, see if you can reuse it, see if you can then maybe advertise your work. But please remember that publishers may have different sharing guidelines. So always check with your publishers what you can do with the paper after publication. And open access. With open access, there's a lot of buzz going on right now, and I would like to maybe demystify a few things. So let's start maybe with what is open access. Open access, by definition, is simply granting free and permanent access to scholarly research to absolutely everyone, regardless of their societal, financial, or otherwise status, so that everyone can access what was done, what was published by researchers. It is called in the US public access, and I think that even is, in my view, a little bit better phrase than simply open access. So how does it work? There are basically two main alternatives in open access. Open access, there's gold open access and there is green open access. Elsevier is currently the largest green open access publisher because we do have green open access policies across all of our journals. And in terms of gold open access, we don't have the most journals here. But gold open access, in this version, the final version of article is immediately available to everyone. So the moment it is produced, it's available to everyone. The cost of publishing is recovered upfront. So this is the only situation where the author pays to publish. Typically, this is called article publishing charge. It's something called APCs. And this is the charge that covers the expense that the publishers take. So what we do employ editors, we do employ typesetters, people who are responsible for formatting all of your articles. Then we, of course, host them, we maintain them, we prepare them for indexation, so we tag them, we make sure you get visibility to your paper, and we host it on Science Direct with millions of users every month. And we, as I mentioned before, we invest in permanent archiving, because those activities are directly related to the cost of publishing, and that is called the article publishing charge that is recovered upfront. In terms of Elsevier, this is anything between $150 to $5,000. It depends on the journal and on the discipline as well. So you should simply check if this is a gold open access journal, what would be the fee. Nevertheless, in subscription journals or hybrid journals, you always have the option to publish for free. And so that's something I was surprised to learn, that some people still think that publishing with Elsevier costs. It doesn't cost. There is the subscription model in which you don't pay at all for publishing. So the other open access, then the green open access. In this case, the version of the subscription article is simply made freely available, but it doesn't say that clearly when. It is the open access that allows the subscription model to continue to operate. The subscription model looks like this, that the author doesn't pay anything for publishing, but the reader pays to read. So it's basically like buying newspaper in a kiosk. You simply pay to read the newspaper. And in this case, we allow researchers to share their paper in a given way. This is what I mentioned in the slide before. We do have some sharing policies that you can follow. Basically, we always allow to host, to publish the draft copy of the article. So before it is produced, this is called the author's manuscript or the author's version of the paper, before it was published, before it was produced by us. That is what we usually allow to publish easily. We also allow after the embargo period. It really depends from journal to journal, so you can always check that. But we do allow a lot of green open access options to our authors. So we have a green open access policy to all of our journals, which is currently more than 2,000. So let's have a quick overview overall by business model. There's a lot of numbers and data in here, but if you just look at the figure to your right, currently in 2018 there were approximately 2.5 million articles published, And these are the peer-reviewed journals. These are not even predatory journals. We don't even include them here. So 2.5 million scientific articles in the world just in 1 year. And out of those, 80%, so 2 million out of 2.5 million, is still published in subscription model. So in the situation where the reader pays to read and not the author to publish. We can see, of course, that the number of fully gold open access journals is growing steadily over the past 6 or 7 years. But it doesn't happen at the expense, currently it doesn't happen at the expense of the subscription journals. That's basically the current situation that we have. We understand and we know that open access will be increasingly growing. However, currently in Elsevier, we published last year, in 2018, we published more than 450,000 articles, and out of that, 33,000 or 33 and something were open access. And as much as this may be still below 10%, what we noticed that it is a 26% increase since 2017. So in a year, we had a 26% growth in the number of open access articles. And this is mostly because there is more and more growing need to publish in open access in several countries, so basically in Europe as well. Okay, this is a very crowded slide, but I always like to show what we've done over the past 16 years, how we actually opened ourselves as a publisher to open access. It started maybe in 2002, then we set up Research for Life. We are the founder of Research for Life. It is an initiative that allows free or very cheap access to our resources and others' resources to developing countries. So countries which would in no other way be able to gain access to what we've published, but they would definitely benefit from those resources. We opened archives. Currently, there's more than 110 titles with open archives, so everything historically was opened up. What else do we have? I'm just looking at it, not to read it all to you. We introduced open access into subscription model, and we now have almost 2,000 journals which are so-called hybrid titles, in which you can either way. So at the end of the review, you decide, do I want this published as open access or do I want to publish this for free as a subscription article? This is up to you in most of our journals. We introduced share links, so links which allow you a free and unrestricted access to your research paper for 50 days. You can share it with whoever you like for 50 days. You'll get it for free. We reduced and varied our APCs, so we don't have a strict number. So as I said, anything between $150 and $5,000 per paper, per open access paper, if you choose open access, of course, and that depends on the journal. And in terms of acquisitions, we acquired Mendeley in 2013, which allows researchers to share their work and collaborate better and easier. We introduced, in terms of acquisitions, we acquired SSRN and we acquired bPress. Over the past 4 years, was quite a lot of shopping, so to say. Then the most recent introduction that we've done, actually not that late, so last year, we introduced open access query search in Scopus, so we can search exclusively for open access content through Scopus. And more numbers in terms of gold open access. So gold open access, that's when you pay up front, pay the APCs, so you recover the expense of publishing, and then your paper is made available to everyone instantly. We currently have 170 fully open access journals, so in those you have to pay, you always have to pay. And we have more than 1,850, so 1,850 hybrid journals where open access is optional, so you can always publish there for free. You have a choice of licenses, of commercial or non-commercial license, so you as an author decide which license that would be. And in terms of green open access, we have green open access options in all of our journals. So all of them, there is a way to share that content freely according to certain policies. I already mentioned the share links, and I mentioned opened archives. That is 110 titles. What is quite important is that self-press titles, archives of self-press titles are opened after only 12 months. So quite new content is made available very quickly. We also work closely with funders to understand their open access policies, to understand the impact of that, and to allow our authors to comply with those policies so that they are not in the middle of the conflict between the funder and the publisher. We cooperate with funders, we ask them for feedback, we provide them also with insights of what might work best for them as well. And now, final part, ethical concerns. Ethical concern, I can see some questions, but I'll answer them right after the ethical concerns just to make sure we don't run over time. So ethical concerns. One of my favorite pictures. I would like to start with a cat. Everyone who's met me probably would know by now that I'm a cat person by all means, so this is why I always like to show a cat, and I always like to joke that I feel professionally fulfilled because I can show a cat and this is justified. It really is. This cat is called FDC Willard, and he is a scholar. He wrote a paper on physics. Seems maybe unlikely, but this is the story of the cat. So what actually happened is that, yes, this cat has a paper. He's the co-author of a very good paper. And the story goes that this is the 70s. Mr. Hetherington, who was the owner of the cat, he wrote a paper. He wrote a paper, I can't remember exactly on the content, but he wrote a nice physics paper. And because those were the 70s, you had to still type your manuscript using the typesetter, so not the computer. You would have to prepare 3 manuscripts and send them over to your editor for review. And this is what he did. And then the editor got back to Mr. Hetherington and said, like, the paper is nice, however, you are using the royal we. So you are writing, we measured, we checked, we verified, we observed, and you are the only author. So you either way change the whole manuscript, or you verify whether you really are the only author, or maybe you forgot someone. And Mr. Hetherington had a dilemma. What would you rather do? Should I add one of my colleagues and be done with it? Or should I change those 3 manuscripts I was just typesetting for a week? So he decided it's easier to change at the front page with the name of the author, but he didn't want to add his colleagues, which at least was the more ethical thing to do. And he decided that what's the harm in adding my cat? So he gave the cat the name FDC Willard and sent the paper to the editor. The paper was reviewed, accepted, and it was a hit. It was a very good paper. And Mr. Hetherington and FDC Willard were then invited to participate in a conference as keynote speakers. As you can imagine, the cat was not very willing to travel. And that's when Mr. Hetherington had to somehow explain why his co-author is refusing to be a keynote speaker at the conference. So Mr. Hetherington arrived at the conference, and he was handing out printouts of the paper with compliments of the author. The thing you see in the top right corner is a cat's paw. So he actually stamped the cat's paw on the paper. That's the story I heard. It's for, let's say, 40 years ago, so maybe it may not be the most accurate story, but this is how I heard it, this is how I read it. And FDC Willard, this is actually quite nice. FD stands for Latin name of a cat, of a domestic cat. C stands for Chester, which is the real cat's name, and Willard is this cat's father's name. It's a full-breed Siamese cat, so you know the name of the father. And that's what breeders need to do. And Why am I telling you a story about a cat? Because this particular act is called gift authorship. It is a serious ethics violation. So you should never add someone who's not the author to the authors list. Authorship is only reserved for people who made intellectual contribution to the paper. That's how I like to softly open the difficult subject called unethical behavior. But this is unethical behavior from the author's perspective. And there are a few violations which are severe violations, such as fabrication of data, falsification of data, and plagiarism. In some countries, you can even go to prison for that. Everything else that you see on the list is called, let's say, questionable research, but this is just sugarcoating still a very unethical behavior. One of those is gift authorship. So putting someone who's not the author on the author's list. That's unethical. This is only from the perspective of the author. The editors, the reviewers, they can do their own misconduct, and this is why it's important to go for papers which have the publishing ethics malpractice statement, because they will simply cover all sorts of unethical behavior. And the most severe one, the most popular one, let's say, the most advertised one, the most notorious one, okay, that is plagiarism. And publishers do protect themselves. We try to do whatever we can to minimize the risk of publishing a plagiarized paper. We use cross-read similarity check. It's a database with more than 50 million articles from more than 50,000 journals from more than 200 publishers. Everything that's published with us and all those member publishers is fed into the database, and then other publishers can compare against the text that we've published. Software will alert the editor about any similarity, and it will simply raise a red flag if there's a plagiarism suspicion. But always the editor needs to review the report from the system to verify whether that's not a false plagiarism case, because you, for example, just reproduced an equation. And the final remark. So the final remark is the one like in the last webinar. There is something called Researcher Academy. It's free for everyone. It's a free e-learning platform that we set up. You can find it at researcheracademy.elsevier.com. You can read and learn about the publishing process, about writing papers, publishing papers, being a good reviewer, writing good grant applications, basically communicating your research, making it visible. So all the aspects that I touched upon this week and in the previous webinar, so that you can basically learn more about it. And that was my final one. So now we can jump into questions. And I can see some questions. I'll have a look at them. If you have a question, you can still type it. We still have a couple of minutes left. And let me see. Okay, there was a technical question. Okay. And in terms of sharing the presentation, I unfortunately cannot share the presentations with you because mostly due to GDPR, BrightTalk doesn't collect your email address. It doesn't disclose your email addresses to me. So I cannot. However, you can always go back to this presentation. You can take notes. You can reuse it. You can share this. You can share this recording. You can work with the recording as you see it. We still have 1 minute left, I believe. So if you still have some questions, you can type them. I'll be here. If not, I'll still be here if you have questions. But for those of you who need to leave, or if you have a question later on, this is my email address. You can always send me an email if you have a question, if you have a comment. If you would like to invite me to your institution to do a similar presentation, to do a similar training, but live at your institution, feel free to reach out to me. Just drop me an email and I'm sure we can make appropriate arrangements and I can come and visit. And this is never associated with any expense on your side, so you don't have to worry about covering any expenses of me arriving. I'm still here for, let's say, 30 seconds if you have any more questions, and I'll have a look. Maybe if you have a question, you can still type it, and then I'll answer it. I don't see any more questions coming up. So thank you very much for your attention today. I wish you a very lovely afternoon, and I hope this presentation was informative to you. Thank you very much for today, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Bye-bye.